common ground in many areas of agreement, as well as some areas where we have different ideas about how we can restore our democracy. I want to now introduce a speaker who offers a compelling vision of how we can move forward together, despite our many differences, to get money out of politics. He is someone whose thinking has been highly influential and respected within Occupy, and whose early and enthusiastic support for this event has been critical in allowing us to achieve what we have today. He's been generous enough, despite his unrelenting schedule, to make it to DC from Boston to deliver this keynote address for us. Professor Lessig directs the Edmund J. Saffer Foundation Center for Ethics at Harvard University on a project studying corruption in many different areas, from the funding of research by corporations to, of course, campaign finance in Congress. He's also a professor of constitutional law at Harvard Law School. In addition, he is the founder of Roots Strikers, a nonpartisan organization aimed at restoring power over American politics and government to 100% of the people. Professor Lessig brings to the study of corruption a broad background in the study of technology and copycat, an issue that led him to identify the root of all the policy problems faced by our country today: money in politics. His background in technology and in the culture of open source movement has made him particularly good at understanding and relating to the needs of citizen movement, especially those made up of the youth of today, raised with technology and the internet. He's the author of the revolutionary book Republic Lost, my own copy of which is underlined, highlighted, and dog-eared from ferrying back and forth to our meetings for inspiration. I know I'm not the only one. Republic Lost describes the dynamic between money and politics and the policies we all care about, both on the left and on the right. Why is it that Congress has not tried to address global warming? They're spending all day talking with donors and they aren't listening to the people. Why isn't Congress regulating Wall Street and crony capitalism after the collapse and stabilizing our economy? The banks are funding their campaigns. Money in politics is at the root of the issues we all care about today. Republic Lost and its follow-up edition, One Way Forward, in my estimation, provides the clearest and most compelling exposition of the problem of money in politics and its detrimental effect on our society, as well as a blueprint for a way forward that is imaginative, bold, and both sound from a policy perspective and politically feasible. His insight and clarity of thought on these issues are truly valuable to us to help us decide on the best ways to move forward on this critical issue, which is why Occupy DC asked him to keynote our conference today. Please help me in welcoming Professor Lawrence Lessig.
Thank you, Occupy DC, for inviting me here. It's an honor, and I'm extremely happy to be here and to have a chance to bring my son, Teo, who saw a lot of aircraft and the shuttle at the Air and Space Museum this morning, and he thinks that was the best part of the day. So maybe it was. We'll see. So I thought on a day like today, I should try to keep things simple. It's a beautiful day. It's the weekend. We shouldn't try to make things too complicated. So what I thought I would do is I would give you a statement of the problem and the solution. But then as I thought about that, I realized that actually the solution invites its own problem. And so then we had to think about a solution to that new problem. And then as I saw that, I realized that that new solution created its own problem, which required a third solution again. And then I realized the really important thing for me to do in the course of this talk today is to get down to brass tacks and talk about what we need to do. And that's what I want to do. I'm going to start by laying out how we have to think about this problem and end by saying what I think we need to do. So here's the problem. It is quite simple. This institution is corrupt. It is not corrupt in a brown paper bag sense of corrupt. It's not corrupt in a Rob Blagojevich sense of corrupt. It's not corrupt in any criminal sense. Indeed, I want to stipulate that there's practically no criminal activity in what I'm talking about at all. Or another way of putting that, if we eliminated every single criminal, we would not have changed this problem at all. Instead, the corruption here is corruption relative to what the framers of our Constitution thought they were giving us. As Nick Neihart described it, the framers of our Constitution gave us what they call a republic. they meant a representative democracy. And by a representative democracy, as Federalist 52 puts it, they meant a democracy that would have a branch of government that would be dependent upon the people alone. Here's their model of government. The people, the government. I do my own slides, that's cool. The people, the government. Here's the problem. Congress has evolved a different dependence. Not just a dependence upon the people, but increasingly a dependence upon the funders. As members spend between 30 and 70% of their time raising money to get back to Congress or get their party back to power, they develop, as any of us would, a sixth sense, a constant awareness about how what they do might affect their ability to raise money. They become, in the words of the X-Files, shape-shifters. As they constantly adjust their views, not on issues 1 to 10, but on issue 11 to 1,000, in light of what they know will raise money. Leslie Byrne, a Democrat from Virginia, describes that when she came to Congress, she was told by a colleague, quote, always lean to the green. And then to clarify, she went on, he was not an environmentalist. Now the point is, this is a dependence too. But it's a different and conflicting dependence from a dependence upon the people alone because, surprise, surprise, the funders are not the people. 0.26%. People say he's a lawyer, he doesn't underdo percentages, but I really mean 0.26%. 1/4% of Americans give more than $200 in a congressional election. 0.05%. Max out to any congressional candidate. 0.01%, the 1% of the 1%, give more than $10,000 in any election cycle. And 0.000063%, 196 Americans have given 80% of the money spent by super PACs in this presidential election so far. So, Occupy is proud of us. We are the 99%. I think it's more like we are the 99.74%, or the 99.95%, or the 99.99%, or the 99.999937% who don't have the power that the 0.26, 0.05, 0.01, 0.0000063% have because they have the money and we just have the votes. This is corruption. It is a dependence corruption. It is a corruption on the design that these framers gave us. Now, many people say, you know, who cares what the framers gave us, right? They gave us slavery. That wasn't such a big idea. So who cares if we have a democracy not quite the way they intended it to be? Well, it's a fair question. Here's the fair answer. This corruption has an effect. Its effect number one is that Americans believe, and I think Americans are right to believe, but let's stick with Americans believe money buys results in Congress, quote unquote. In a poll we conducted for the book that I published last year, 75% of Americans said money buys results in Congress. A little bit more Democrats than Republicans, but I guarantee you before the Republicans took control of the House, it was just as many Republicans as Democrats. So whether it's 2/3 or 3/4, here's the one thing we all, as Americans, agree about. Money buys results in Congress. Leading to point number two. That belief erodes trust in this institution of Congress. Gallup found last year that 11% of Americans had confidence in Congress. They then said it went up to 12%. New York Times said it was actually 9% of Americans who had confidence in Congress. 9%. There is certainly more percentage of people who believed in the British Crown at the time of the Revolution than who believe in this Congress today. And that leads to point number three. Low trust erodes participation in this democracy. Rock the Vote, the fantastic organization that organizes young voters and turns them out to vote, found that after turning out the largest number of young voters in 2008 in the history of voting in the United States, that in 2010 a significant number of their voters were just not going to turn out to vote. So they polled them. And the number one reason given by far, 2-to-1 over the second highest reason was, quote, no matter who wins, corporate interests will still have too much power and to prevent real change. And it's not just kids who believe this. The vast majority of people who could have voted in 2010 did not vote because, in part, of this belief. Now, this is the problem. And that problem begs for an obvious solution. If it's a systemic problem, which is that the funders are not the people, then it's a systemic solution that would make the funders the people. To give them away. I know that looks like give Congress away. I don't mean that. I know a lot of people want to do that, but I don't mean give Congress away. I mean give Congress a way to fund without Faust, without selling their souls, without alienating America. And the one way to do this, and I increasingly think the only way to do this, is to embrace what I'm going to name here citizen-funded campaigns. Okay, we can clap, some can clap, or you can... Yeah! Let's be clear about what exactly this should mean. You know, many people in Silicon Valley say, you know, we don't have to fund campaigns at all. The internet can make this all happen for free. But I think we have to accept the fact that for a significant period of time, we're going to have to fund campaigns. But the question is, by whom will these campaigns be funded? And the first way to answer that question is to decide between citizens or non-citizens who should be funded these campaigns. Non-citizens like the Chinese, the French, or whether or not corporations are persons, no one has ever said they are citizens of the United States. So should it be non-citizens who are funding elections or citizens? And when framed like that, overwhelmingly, Americans say, of course, it should be citizens. But if it's citizens, which citizens should be funding campaigns? Some citizens or all citizens? Right? Because we have a system right now, which is a citizen-funded campaign system, where just some citizens fund campaigns. They fund campaigns through large dollar contributions funded by a small percentage of Americans, 0.26, 0.05, 0.01, producing a per capita contribution level which is truly astonishing. This is not just representative. These are real proportions that I'm showing you right here. Real proportions in the relationship between the per capita contribution of the 0 to 20%, 20 to 40%, 40 to 60%, all the way up, and the high, tall, powerful figure is the 1%. We have a system where the 1% per capita contribution is 10 times the per capita contribution of the 99%. Now, you should step back from this and say, this is kind of weird that we run a government like this. You know, if you think about elections in the United States, every cycle, there's at least two very different kinds of elections that happen. One kind of election is the voter election, where people go out and vote. The second kind of election is the money election, where people every single day decide whether they're going to send their money to candidates so that the candidates can use that money to get people to vote. All right, now our Constitution has been interpreted to say that in the voting election, we have to be almost precisely equal. That if you have a district drawn so that the concentration of voting power in that district is even 0.1% different from the concentration of voting power in the district next to it, the Constitution requires we redraw the lines to make sure that the effect of votes is exactly the same. That's the value of equality when it comes to votes. But when it comes to money, there is no principle of equality at all, permitting radically different influence on the basis of your opportunity to use money to influence elections. So these citizen-funded elections by a small segment of our citizens have produced elections funded by the tiniest slice of the 1%, which is exactly the picture the progressives gave us of elections 100 years ago. And so when I talk about citizen-funded elections, obviously, I don't mean to talk about that. But that leads people to the opposite extreme, where they say, okay, we all should fund elections. And the simplest way to fund elections for all of us would be something like the Federal Election Commission's public funding of presidential election system, where we just get a bunch of money from the federal government and give it out to fund elections. Now this system, interestingly, is generally hated by Americans. Some think it's arbitrary, the numbers are arbitrary. Some on the right in particular say there's something wrong with my money being used to subsidize your speech. And most people look at it and think it's a kind of bloated, bureaucratic mess that doesn't really reflect anything fundamental or important about what democracies or elections should be about. So I want to say when I'm talking about citizen-funded elections, I'm also not talking about that. I'm not talking about the Federal Election Commission's public funding elections. What I'm talking about is a system where all people fund elections, but the decisions about how to fund elections are driven from the bottom up, not the top down. And these are the systems that Nick Neihart was talking about in the panel before. These are voluntary, small dollar funded campaigns. Systems that allow candidates to opt into a system where they take small dollar contributions only, and the system amplifies those small dollar contributions. As you heard, there are many versions of this. Arizona, Maine, and Connecticut have a version which has successfully elected people from the left and the right using these small dollar funded systems. Connecticut, when it adopted this system, found that 78% of elected representatives opted into this system in the first year, 78%. And Maine similarly has seen Republicans and Democrats participating, and Arizona on the right, the elections on the right have been most dramatically affected by this system for small dollar funding. And based on the success of these three states, as Nick described, Congress came close, the House came close to passing the Fair Elections Now Act, which would have created an equivalent system at the federal level. But what I wanted to do in my book is to take some of the criticisms from the right of these systems. That it's arbitrary, that my money is being used to support your speech, and try to figure out if there was a way to architect a small dollar funded system that would answer those concerns. And so what I crafted was something that pointed to briefly what I call the Grant and Franklin Project. So here's how the Grant and Franklin Project works. You first have to stipulate with me, and I can give you the numbers to demonstrate this, but you have to stipulate that every single American voter, in some way or another, contributes at least $50 to the federal treasury. Whether it's income tax, or Social Security tax, or payroll tax, or Medicare, whatever, cigarette tax, gasoline, whatever, we all, in some way, give at least $50 to the federal treasury. So let's embrace some Tea Party rhetoric. That's my money, and I want it back. I want that first $50 back. It's my money, and I want it back. And once I get it back, I want to do something with it. So, I want to rebate that first $50 in the form of a democracy voucher. And with that democracy voucher, we say any candidate can get that voucher, or part of that voucher, if he or she agrees to fund his or her campaign with democracy vouchers only, plus contributions limited to $100 per citizen, in honor of Buddy Romer. Okay, $50 plus $100 per citizen. Grant and Franklin. All right, now, $50 a voter is $7 billion in the election system. That's 3 times the amount raised and spent in 2010. So that's real money, and it is representative money, meaning it's money coming from everyone in the election system, not just the tiniest slice of the 1%. And more important, you should think about the politics that this kind of system begins to create. Because when we took this idea just a couple weeks ago, David Siegel and I took this idea to some very smart people at SEIU. Of course, most everybody at SEIU is extremely smart, but these were very smart people at SEIU to talk about the idea of vouchers. The first thing they thought was something that's so obvious that I'd never thought of. They said, this is great, go talk to the NRA about this idea. And begin to recognize every single membership organization would look at something like a voucher program as an extremely effective way to make it so that their members would have a more effective way to participate in the politics of their system. Because, of course, even in a system where you can give $100, the vast majority of Americans don't have $100 to give in political campaigns. They have $100 to pay their rent, they hope, but not necessarily to give in their political campaigns. So the politics of a voucher program is to extend all the way across the spectrum of Americans, the opportunity to participate in the political system in a way that politicians would care to respond to. Right now, the politicians don't give I'd use a really bad word, but my 5-year-old is here, so I won't. Don't give a hoot about anybody outside of the range of big contributors. That's what Nick told you when he told you that 6% of campaign money comes from people giving $200 or less. So where do you think they focus their attention? But in a voucher system, they would focus their attention all the way across, because all the way across there is a potential resource to get into their political campaign. That's what I think we have to mean by citizen-funded elections. A system where everyone is participating from the bottom up. Only citizens are participating, but all citizens are participating. And that's the way to get back this idea of a democracy dependent upon the people alone. Now, is it enough? Given the non-citizen-funded super PACs or citizen-funded campaigns, enough against them? And I actually thought, I make many mistakes in my life. Here was just another of them. I actually thought 2 years ago it would be enough. But obviously, we've seen it's not enough. Super PACs have redefined the character of campaigns. We've entered the age of the super PAC. Not just happy super PACs like Colbert super PACs, but super PACs that evoke more a Tony Soprano image. Super PACs, and I mean this quite literally. I saw Evan Bayh, who was a great senator from Indiana who retired when it just got so gross, describe the effect of super PACs. In a panel event where a member of the Cato Institute was asking Senator Bayh whether he really thought that money affected results in politics because, as he said, the political scientists have not been able to demonstrate that it does. Oh. So Evan Bayh kind of rolled his eyes. And he said, look, you have no idea about how dramatically Washington has been changed by Citizens United. Citizens United has made it so the single thing incumbents are most worried about is that 30 days before the election, some super PAC will come in and drop $1 million on the other side. So what does the incumbent do in the face of that threat? Well, and just to reframe what he said a little bit, to make it a little bit more clear, what the incumbent does is the incumbent tries to buy super PAC insurance. So what's super PAC insurance? It's insurance so that when somebody comes in and drops a bomb on one side, your insurers come in and drop a bomb on the other side to kind of balance it out, to make it so that the effect of the super PAC money is not decisive. So how do you buy insurance? Well, you all know this. You pay your premium in advance. You pay your premium long before you need the insurance company to come in and make their payment in the face of the event they're trying to insure against. And the event they're trying to insure against is somebody coming in and dropping $1 million on the other side. And how do you pay your premium if you're a senator in advance? Well, you talk to groups who say things like, well, we'd like to help you, Senator, but we can only support people who support us of at least 80% of our scorecard. So long before the election, long before any money is spent, long before any super PAC appears on the other side, senators and representatives are deciding how to vote in light of what they need to do in order to guarantee that the rich people on their side will step up if they're threatened. And they do that by voting in the way that their rich people on their side demand. So here's the genius of this protection racket. Without the super PAC spending $1, the senators and the representatives begin to race to the extremes necessary to encourage and guarantee their support. Without spending $1, the system has produced a protection racket for incumbents that explains, I don't want to say causes, let's just say explains, the extraordinary polarization that we have seen in politics in the time even since Citizens United. This is what Citizens United gave us. And I think what this means is that we need more than citizen-funded campaigns. I agree with the movements that say we need to amend the Constitution to make it so Citizens United does not stand for the principle that individuals, whether corporate or private, have a right to spend unlimited amounts of money affecting elections. Now, I'm a lawyer, so I would drop a footnote. There'll be one sentence here. And the footnote is, you heard it here first, I think the court's going to back away from that position in the Montana case that they're deciding this year. So I think this might be a short-term fight. But this is why I think it's so important not to think that the fight we are having is a fight about Citizens United. Because on January 20th, 2010, the day before Citizens United was decided, our democracy was already dead. Citizens United shot the body, but the body was already cold. So any movement that aims to just reverse Citizens United and no more is not a movement that's going to solve the problems we face. So while I agree we have to overturn Citizens United, I think we should recognize that it's a much bigger fight we have. And I would overturn Citizens United quite directly. Not in these magic bullet words of whether money is speech or corporations or persons, quite directly. I would say Congress has the power that Citizens United says they don't have. To limit it, I don't think they should have the power to ban speech by anybody. So I would say limit independent political expenditures within 90 days of an election, whether it's 90 or 120, I don't know what those numbers are. But the point is, there's a period of time where we should be able to silence the noise, non-citizen noise, and allow citizens to hear campaigns talk to citizens. So both of these reforms are essential. Number one, we have to guarantee, and I would do it constitutionally, as was suggested in the last question before. We have to guarantee in a constitution that elections are publicly funded, and the way I would do it is the way I've described. And number two, I would guarantee that we have the power to limit independent expenditures. And in this respect, I'm extremely proud to come and speak to the Occupy DC group, which passed a resolution misreported by everybody, that is the only resolution I think that has been passed in the Occupy movement that made these two elements central to what reform has to be. In addition, they add the corporations and non-persons part, which I think is fine, but the part that they argued so effectively and demanded change on was these two changes that are essential to bring about the solution that we need. So I thank Occupy DC for that. That's exactly where we have to aim. But here's the problem. Problem version 2. It's not clear that it's possible for the institutions of our government to make these changes. It's not clear that it's possible. The darkest moment in my thinking about this happened when I spoke to this man, Jim Cooper, Democrat from Tennessee, who has been in Congress for about as long as anybody, except for about 20 other members of Congress. Jim Cooper said to me, the problem with Capitol Hill is that Capitol Hill has become a, quote, farm lead for K Street. K Street, where lobbyists live. You know, K Street, you probably know some lobbyists, they're probably some of your best friends. Anyway, K Street. He said, members and staffers and bureaucrats have an increasingly common business model in their head. A business model focused on their life after government, their life as lobbyists. Public Citizen calculated between 1994 and 2000 and 1998 and 2004, 50% of senators left to become lobbyists, 42% of the members of the House. Those numbers have only gone up. And as United Republic reported in their blog last month, the average salary increase for a representative leaving to become a lobbyist, 1,452%. So Cooper's point was everybody depends on this system surviving. So how is it possible that they could change this? And I think we have to entertain the idea that maybe they can't. On their own, maybe they can't. And that is the statement of problem 2. Leading us then, of course, to solution 2. So the Charati out there say that the interesting political divide in America is between the left side and the right side. I think the only interesting political divide in America is between the inside and the outside. The inside, the officials who live inside this beltway, and the outside, the rest of America. And when you think about the difference between what those on the inside care about, or talk about, or focus upon, and what the outside of America cares about, or talks about, or focuses upon, you begin to borrow and remix the title a little bit, recognize that DC is from Mars and we are from Earth. The outsiders have a politics. Let's call it exopolitics. Outsider politics. That politics is not a politics of politicians. The Occupy movement is not filled with congressman wannabes. They're not filled with people who are finding this is the quickest path to becoming a government official. They're filled with citizens. Citizens demanding that their politics change. And what we can see if we look back over the past 14 years is waves of open source energy that manifests this exopolitics. So I think the beginning of this really is 1998 with MOPUP, where America looked at this city and said, wait a minute, you're going to impeach a president because he slept with an intern, or didn't sleep. He had sex with an intern, or quote sex with an intern, and lied about it. That's why you're going to impeach a president. And most of America said, you know, we've got real problems here. We want you to pay attention to those real problems. So a couple of coders in Silicon Valley started a list, and within a couple of weeks, millions of people had joined that list and demanded Congress move on. I think the Tea Party is a similar exopolitics movement. Not today, but when it was born. It was captured and embraced by very powerful people located here, and lots of money driven here. But when it was born, it was a similar exopolitics movement, a wave of energy that burst from where no one expected it to come. I think the Occupy movement is an exopolitics movement. I think the thing that killed SOPA was an exopolitics movement. These are outsiders empowered by an infrastructure that allows them to connect and identify and do something. And they are passionate in each of these different fields, with each of these different ways about what they are doing. And of course, this is part of a much bigger shift. A shift to decentralized ways of what they call themselves to be open-sourced energy, not just in the United States, but globally, as it redefines power all across the world, in Spain, in Israel, in France, in the Middle East, and hopefully, let us pray, here in the United States. If there is hope for this movement, it is here in this exopolitics. Okay, that's solution 2, but here finally is problem number 3. The hope is exopolitics. This problem of corruption, though, is going to require a constitutional solution. Even if it doesn't require amending the Constitution, even if the Supreme Court fixes Citizens United, it still will require fundamental change, which is what citizen funding of elections would be. Fundamental change. There has literally been only one example in the history of the United States of fundamental change happening in the United States, which was not part of a cross-partisan movement. That one example was the Civil War. In every other example of fundamental change in the history of the United States, it has been a cross-partisan movement that has made that change possible. Now, I mean that word quite precisely. I don't mean bipartisanship. I don't mean the kind of movement that got us into the war in Iraq and the war in Afghanistan, the kind of let's all say we agree about everything, kumbaya, we're all together. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm not saying bipartisan, I mean cross-partisan. I mean a movement that cuts across partisan differences, where people acknowledge we disagree about everything, except, hey, we actually do agree about this. That's what the movement has to be, but the exopolitics that we have seen over the past 14 years is extraordinarily polarized right now. Like everyone in our society. Like politicians. Like political parties. Like the media. Like even organizations that are motivating people to do things. All of these entities practice a business model of polarization. They all profit the more they divide. And I think it's true, we have to acknowledge the ways in which all of these organizations profit the more they divide. We live in this kind of gray man culture, polarized but very, very cool. That's the third problem. And that begs this third solution. Here's the question. Is there a way to get beyond the us versus them? Is there a way to get beyond the business model of polarization? And I think it begins by a recognition. This is the Thoreauvian insight that we've tried to build into a part of this movement. 1846, sitting around the beautiful Walden Pond, Thoreau writes, "There are 1,000 hacking at the branches of evil to one who is striking at a root." The root striker. What the root striker here sees is that if you step back and think about any issue you care about, on the left and on the right, whether it's healthcare reform for the left or government bailouts on the right, whether it's global warming on the left or a complex tax system on the right, whether it's financial reform on the left or financial reform on the right, if you step back and you see these issues and connect the dots, what you have to recognize is we get no change in any of those issues until we change this. But today, in the politics of this moment, there's a conspiracy of silence around this. Governor Romney is not going to talk about money in politics, having beaten his opponents, outspending them 4-1. All that gold just glitters in his eyes. And President Obama no doubt wishes for a world where money doesn't buy results. But after spending 3 years just wishing, he's a little bit too embarrassed to raise this as an issue again. So both sides will not touch this issue from now until the election. So the fundamental question for us has got to be, how do we force it back into the center? All right, here's the do. 3 things. Number 1, we have to begin the steps towards a new kind of exopolitics. A new kind of exopolitics. One that recognizes the need for an alliance and recognizes the need to focus on common ground. An alliance that acknowledges diversity, yet understands here across partisan divide is a common purpose. An alliance. Think this alliance. Right? Imagine sitting in the room with Stalin and Churchill and FDR. These people couldn't be any more different. They didn't have to give up their values to say we have this common alliance. Don't think about this alliance, where the objective was everyone had to be the same. That's what I mean by an alliance. The Churchill alliance. Or for us, the alliance that might begin to talk about how people from this movement and people from that movement might talk together. Number 1. And number 2, focused on the common ground. Not on a common end. I don't think we have a common end between the Tea Party and the movements in the Occupy movements. What we have is a common enemy. A common enemy in this corruption. A common enemy that is captured in this picture, in a system that will guarantee that the tiniest slice of the 1% block whatever we want on the left and whatever they want on the right. So it's this new exopolitics that is step 1. Step 2. With this new politics, we have to make the recognition that we have about this corruption manifest, make it visible, make the commitment to it visible, the commitment to it and to its reform. There are 1,000 ways to do that. All of us have to push in our own way. We've started this small site right now, just testing, called anticorruptionpledge.org. This site allows you to go and say what you believe reform would look like. Public elections, publicly funded, limit independent expenditures, close the revolving door, reaffirm that when the Declaration of Independence spoke of entities, quote, endowed by their creator with certain unalienable rights, it was speaking of natural persons only. You can signal which of these things you believe reform is, and then share that conception of reform with your friends and with your readers on your site. And when 10 million Americans make that commitment, then we turn them around and have them talk to their representatives and say to their representatives, we want you to make that commitment. And we want that commitment signed, tied to particular bills that will achieve it, whether constitutional reform or statutory reform. Because if we can make visible 10 million Americans committed to this, we force it back into the center of this debate. That's number 2. Here's number 3, the hardest one to swallow. We have to be opportunistic. We have to take the chances and opportunities that we can. And I want to talk to you about what for many people is a very controversial opportunity. It's completely misunderstood, I think, but completely new and not yet described fully entity called Americans Elect. Americans Elect is a platform that's been set up to facilitate creating a candidate who will be on every single presidential ballot this November. It's the first time in the history of the modern political parties that we would have a candidate on every ballot in every state who has not come through the political parties to get to that place. Now, I was an opponent of Americans Elect when it first came out, because I didn't think that their real objective here, which was, as they say, to get over the partisan binary frame, I didn't think that objective was the problem in American politics. But the more I think about this, the more I recognize that this has an enormous potential to break the conspiracy of silence on this issue right now. Because if we had a candidate at the top of this who made money his number one issue, and that candidate had the opportunity, because of a ferocious battle to get to that place, this is the independence primary that has just begun, then we have the chance to force them to answer for this, the most important issue in this republic today. And there is one candidate who has walked hundreds of miles making this claim. Hundreds of miles making this claim so far. And that one candidate is someone familiar to all of you. His name is Buddy Roemer. Buddy Roemer is within 3,000 clicks on American Elect to being the front runner in that race, to clear the first hurdle to be the front runner in that race. And if 15% of Americans recognize that candidate and support that candidate, the Commission on Presidential Debates has said that candidate will be on stage in the presidential debates. And if Roemer were on stage, he would ask that question to President Obama and to Mitt Romney, and that question would be, how could you say you are free to lead when all of your money has come from the tiniest slice of the 1%? Now, I recognize there are important questions. Questions about Americans Elect. Who are they? Who are their funders? What are they doing? Why are they here? And there are questions about Buddy Roemer. After all, he's a Republican. But actually, as I think about it, I'll confess, this might surprise you, but if there's a choice between Romney and Obama, I'm voting Obama. Okay, so that's my cards on the table. I want Obama to win in that choice. So I worry about forcing this issue onto the stage if it jeopardizes the man I want to win. But if it's a Republican on that stage who is saying, what about this problem? He splits the Republican base, because we know from polling that the Tea Party is as furious about this issue as we on the left are. He splits the Republican base. And it's feasible and easy, and I think obvious, that Obama can credibly say, I completely agree with you, buddy. So he doesn't split the Democratic base. And so in this remote cycle, sequence of thinking, there's a way to understand the intervention here such that it doesn't jeopardize what I think should happen if it's a choice between Romney and Obama, but puts this issue back on stage. Now, it's a risk. Why take the risk? Here's why. We can't let this issue go dark in this presidential election. If we go through this presidential election without this becoming the focal point of the debate, then we will have had 2 election cycles where the tiniest slice of the 1% have bought the elections. And when those 2 cycles have passed, most Americans will just accept this is the way democracy is. They will accept the pat down of American democracy that guarantees that the rich can buy their results is just what we have, and there's nothing that can be done about it. So the one step, I think the most important step, in some sense the most obvious step, the cheapest step that we can take to radically change the character of this debate is to occupy Americans elect. To occupy Americans elect and to make that a vehicle for putting this issue on stage, it takes 3,000 clicks. And if the Occupy movement can't muster 3,000 clicks, then what the hell are we doing here? That's step 3. Okay, here's the final point. I go around and speak way too much about this issue. Way too much. And the overwhelming response I get is a response similar to a response I got when I gave a speech at Dartmouth. And I finished, the woman stood up and she said, "Professor, you convinced me, absolutely, that it's impossible to fix this problem." Completely impossible. And I write about this in my book. At that moment, I had this image come to my head about his brother, his 8-year-old brother. And I thought, so imagine a doctor came to me and said, "Your son has terminal brain cancer, and there's nothing you can do. It's impossible for us to deal with this." And I thought, would I do nothing? Just accept it? And that thought led me to a recognition about what love means. What is love? Love is the willingness, the commitment to act in the face of impossibility because of that love. It's the willingness to do whatever it takes, regardless of the probability. And when I had that recognition about my son, I had that recognition about this democracy. Because we on the left love this country too. We on the left believe in the ideals that have been spoken by our founders from throughout our time, Martin Luther King, as much as James Madison. We love this country too. And so when the reasonable, rational person stands up and says, "It's impossible," the response of those who love is, it's irrelevant whether it's impossible. It's irrelevant whether it's impossible. We who love this country have but one choice, and that is to fight like hell to change this system. And as we think about it like this, I think on this issue we need to embrace a different slogan. The slogan is, we are the 100%. We are the 100%. Because when you look at these numbers, you know, I'm a lawyer, 99.99%, that's 100%. That's 100%. We, on this issue, are the 100%. We who love this country and these ideals look at this system of corruption and all of us say, it must change. You have the capacity to make that change start. I'm honored, but I implore you to take the steps to do it. Thank you very much.